Clay.
Order, order, and welcome to the Scottish Affairs Committee in their ongoing inquiry into the space sector in Scotland. Today, and part of our first panel of three, we're joined by the Civil Aviation Authority, and we have Mr. Colin McLeod joining us today. I'll let Mr. McLeod introduce himself and anything by way of a short introductory statement. Mr. McLeod.
Thank you very much. Yes, my name is Colin McLeod. I'm the head of the space regulator in the UK. The space regulator has been in the CAA just under 3 years now. Our key responsibilities are keeping the public safe. It's number one. Number two is making sure we can have sustainable orbit and space activities. And thirdly, we try and do all of that with an eye to efficiency and effectiveness for the sector. We're there to enable the sector, not to stop them necessarily. I think since we've started, we've issued round about 350 licences in the last 3 years. A large number of those are satellite licences for OneWeb, which is the second largest constellation in LEO in the world. We've also seen the first European launch into orbit from Spaceport Cornwall with Virgin Orbit, which, while it failed to reach orbit, it did exactly as we wished it to in terms of safety. So there was no property damaged, no one was hurt. And particularly of interest to this committee, we've recently given licences to Saxiford for their spaceport and range operations. So I think we're very well placed now. We've certainly had a very strong focus on continuous improvement and working with the sector and trying to be as agile as possible, as I say, to enable their activities.
Excellent. And thank you very much. And thank you for your written evidence, which I think the committee is very much appreciated. We particularly like the positive tone which is included in this. And there does seem to be a pretty positive reception from the sector. I'm just wondering how you went around building these relationships with the sector. What sort of issues did you have in terms of conversations and how you managed to get to where we are just now?
Yes, we worked very hard with the sector on our engagement plan and engagement strategy. The key things we did when we started, because we're very fortunate to build a regulator from scratch, that gives us lots of opportunities. So while we recognise the regulations we work with are quite difficult, we were able to set up a good business case, which allowed us to make sure we had the right level of skills, capacity and capability, but also allowed us to have an optimism bias. So I assumed that our engineers would only be about 60% as effective as the equivalent FAA engineers who'd been doing this for decades. So we had sufficient capacity and capability in-house to work with the sector. We also set up the Space Launch and Orbit Group, which is a 3 to 4 times a year engagement between us and the sector. The first 18 months or so was primarily us explaining to the sector what the rules and regulations were and how we would operate as a regulator. And in the last sessions, we've started getting more back from the sector. We want it to be a two-way engagement. We involve academia, and actually the sector is now picking up some activities and actions around looking at environmental impact assessments, which is something they found particularly difficult. And finally, what we've tried to do over the last 3 years is, as I say, continuously look at our systems, our processes, to try and find ways to improve them, make them more efficient, listen to the companies. So we've developed products such as safety case workshops and assessment of environmental effects workshops, which are two of the bigger challenges to some of the companies. And we've also improved our guidance. And this week, I think from Wednesday, we'll have an update on quite a batch of our guidance to make it easier to understand and more relevant to the companies, all based on feedback from them as well as our operating teams.
I was going to ask just what your agenda going forward, what the continuing ongoing challenges are, and this seems to be around the guidance that we're hearing that there might just be a bit more work required. Is that roughly how you would see it going forward?
We've done this quite large batch of guidance revision over the last 6-9 months probably, and we've changed the regulators' rules, which in particular were set at quite a strong level, I think, by Parliament and the way they were implemented. We found ways to make that burden a bit less for the companies, particularly companies who come to us more than once, so we can try and used previous information they've given us wherever possible to reduce that kind of burden. Going forward, we definitely want to continue doing that. We have several continuous improvement projects going this year, which are based around different licence types and different particular challenges. And I think what's also coming to us now is space is very innovative, the pace of change is high, and while we've mainly had a focus on spaceports, a small number of launchers, we're now seeing new activities around in-orbit servicing and manufacture, lunar missions, and I've actually got 7 launch companies who are speaking to me who are interested in launching from Scotland from all around the world. So some of the fundamentals are changing more slowly, but more challenges are coming towards us because of the sector's drive and direction.
Most of the interest, quite rightly, is on launch, and you mentioned 2 in your introductory remarks. The one that was in Cornwall, which you describe as a success, and I think we understand that it always requires to go to space for lessons to be learned and for progress to be made. But the other one, of course, is Saxe of Ord. And is that all now concluded? Everything's set up. There will be launch from Saxe of Ord, and CAA is satisfied with the arrangements that are in place.
We're satisfied that arrangements are in place for the spaceport and the range, which is the keeping clear of the maritime and airspace areas to protect the operators there. There is no currently licensed launch operator who can take advantage of those activities yet. I can't talk about individual cases, but I can tell you that there's multiple launchers who are in various stages of the process.
Maybe just for the committee, just explain what those companies would have to do to satisfy you that all the safety issues were dealt with and addressed.
Absolutely. So a launch licence for an operator, like most of our licences, there's 7 key tests. Safety for the public is the primary one. We have to take into account an environmental assessment as well. And there's a range of other tests around national security, national interest, fit and proper persons. So that there's a range of things they have to cover. We estimated originally when we started this could take 9 to 18 months. We've now reassessed that, and we think that 9 months is a reasonable expectation for these licences, assuming that the operator is technically capable of delivering the assessments required and that they've got the skills and capability in-house to work with regulators. One of the key problems we find with new companies is they don't necessarily have a strong regulatory background. You deal with some of the big military primes who are used to operating in these environments. They've got regulatory teams who can help. Some of the smaller companies struggle a little bit with that. So 9 months would be a really good result for an operator, but it could be nearer to 12 to 15 months for new operators.
Given a lot of this activity is in Scotland, and I think there's 6 or 7 sites that have been identified as possible sites for launch, would the CAA consider moving more of its space staff up to Scotland to be available on site?
We do have an office already as the CAA in Stirling, and we can use that. The CAA space team was set up during COVID and is quite hybrid in nature. We have people spread over the whole UK. We've got 2 people who live and work in Scotland already. I think depending on the cadence of activities in Saxeford or the Sutherland or other parts of Scotland where they're working, we would certainly be looking at how we can have closer support, because at the moment people travel from all over the UK to go and support these activities, which is right at this point in time because there's not that many activities and we can be quite precise. But as things scale up, we can be flexible to do that.
Just lastly for me, given that there is it's almost like a subdivision already, and that's the impression I've sort of got from your comments here, is there a case that it might be more convenient and elegant if there was a specific UK space agency as opposed to everything being under the management of the CAA?
So that's a very difficult question. I've been asked this by other committees in the past. I think that the space regulations that we're operating under have only been enforced for just under 3 years. And I would certainly say that my experience of speaking to peers around the world and other countries and other regulators, the UK's approach is recognised as a very good one. So from a space perspective and keeping the public safe and the environment being considered, And also, we're one of the few places in the world where the CAA as a regulator licenses and regulates the spaceports, the range, the launch vehicles and in-orbit activities. Most other countries have these spread between a number of regulators. From that perspective, I think it's probably a bit early to consider what more we could do. I think the other big challenge you have is some of the other regulators that we work with, be it environment regulators, SEPA, maritime agencies, or whether it's health and safety executive, or even sometimes the police and local authorities, and planning. I think those bringing together all of those activities under a single regulator would be quite challenging. And I have to say we did look at a lot of this when we were considering how we built the space regulator, and when we were considering where the space regulator would sit, either as a standalone body or within another organisation. A lot of these aspects were considered in 2020 when we were developing the plans for the new space regulator.
An impression that's not set in stone, though, if a case emerged for a distinct and separate space agency, that would be something you would look at as an ongoing conversation about this.
I think there's two things I would say. The first is that as an effective regulator, our key concerns are public safety and helping the sector. Now, to help the sector, what I mean by that is being as efficient as we can be, getting the right processes, being appropriate in how we ask for information and what we demand and how we look at it. The second thing I would say is an independent safety regulator, in my view, is absolutely critical. We are independent because of historical evidence. So in 1986, when Challenger exploded, the inquiry found that part of the reason that there was a tragedy there was too much pressure to undertake the space activities from an economic and growth perspective. So pressure was put on and the flight took off when it probably shouldn't have. And the second reason, which is more UK focused, is Piper Alpha. So in 1988, when Piper Alpha had a problem, the lessons learned coming out of that was safety regulation should be kept out of the hands of those who are responsible for growth, economy, jobs, etc. So I think that's a particularly important aspect, and that's why we have independent nuclear regulators, chemical, health and safety. So with that background, I think there's no reason you shouldn't consider it, but that to me feels like one of the red lines in terms of protecting the public.
Jarton.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming along. I was very interested in what you were saying there about the independence of the regulator being critical. But also something which was mentioned when we were up at Saxford was the fact that the space, the general airspace management is being looked at the moment. So I did wonder to what extent the airspace management exercise that other parts of the CA are working on with all of our airports, all at the same time, all competing for airspace, is being taken into account or impinging upon the need to manage space for space launches?
Very big question, and it's not just space that's important here, it's future flight, electric flight, RPAS, drones. I can say, while I'm not a deep expert in the airspace area, we work very closely with our colleagues in airspace, and there are certainly a lot of debates and work to be had on airspace users, and it's not just the UK that has this challenge. This is a big challenge for Europe and other countries as well, including ICAO. So I should have probably mentioned earlier in the question about the regulator, one of the key reasons why the CA was chosen as the regulator was because all the space activities have to go up through airspace and then come back down through airspace if needed. And that has helped us hugely in terms of the first launch by Virgin Orbit, and it is helping us to shape and help airspace colleagues make sure that we can limit the impact as much as possible while maintaining critically public safety.
Do you think there's been any, has either exercise held each other up at the moment? I mean, there is a lot of delay in the airspace management programme. Is that impinging upon your own area, or vice versa for that matter?
Not at this point in time. I think what we've certainly discovered in the 2.5 years we've been doing this is most companies who are involved in the space sector, and it's not just the UK, this is a global phenomenon. When I speak to colleagues in the FA and other countries, we all identify this thing we now call space time, which is companies for various reasons set themselves publicly ambitious targets, and their biggest challenge is normally their technical capability to do it. So they quite often come up with a brilliant idea, but they underestimate the time it takes them to develop that concept into implementation. What that has meant is that if some of these companies met their original publicly stated timelines, it would be very difficult for us to achieve some of the airspace changes that they would need to operate. Not impossible, because we do this all the time. The airspace is very mature and we change things all the time for military or royal flights or whatever other reason. So not impossible, but at the moment, as I sit here, we have not had to stop any space activity since the CAA started, be it orbital launches, orbital activities or spaceports, because we managed to keep ourselves off the critical path to that activity, and that's where we want to keep ourselves.
You mentioned one of the important things, or the most important thing, was public safety. So presumably that's a huge part of what you take into account in public safety, is the use of airspace and, as you say, getting through it.
Absolutely, and there's lots of things that can be done in terms of mitigations to public safety. One of the reasons that space, as in the Virgin Orbit example, can fail safely is that we set very large clearance zones or danger areas where if something goes wrong, no one gets hurt. And these areas can be reduced once you start getting flight heritage and operators and vehicles become much more reliable. Early launch vehicles are inherently unreliable. So you can do more and more of that as you get better and better at it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, Mr McLeod. In your evidence, page 4, point 19, you discuss the challenges of launching from the UK, and you speak about expertise and experience held by the applicant organisations, and you've kind of touched on that. You go on to say that operators can understand if they have sufficient skills. What are the sufficient skills you're speaking about there, and how well is it understood? Do the operators understand when they come to you and you give them feedback, or are they aware of what is needed, what is required before they submit applications? And is there a range? Are there some, you spoke, some are very experienced, some are new to the industry. How do those operating in Scotland compare with others around the UK in terms of that level of experience?
I don't think there's any difference from Scottish operators to any other operators, be they European or American or other countries around the world. And the range is very wide. And that's one of the things that we're trying to reduce with our engagement programmes. So I was speaking at a conference last week on in-orbit service and manufacture, and it was really great. At the end of the conference, there was a couple of sessions where new companies could pitch their ideas, and I was able to go and speak to them afterwards. And doing that, we can start the engagement early. They all knew that they needed to speak to the regulators, but they hadn't worked out how or when to do it. And we always say, you come as early as possible, we'll try and help as much as we can. But the kind of skills you need are people who are good at project management, who can build the right framework for matching the technical development with their regulatory and other requirements. People who have got some experience of legislation is always helpful. But I have seen everything from chief execs coming to me with a license application and telling me they haven't read any of the guidance yet, which is particularly disappointing because they're the ones who have to sign it, to companies who have come forward with a completed safety case and loads of detail because they've read everything and they've had a really good go at it. So you get the extremes. We want to do far more of supporting the newer companies, because the earlier they come to us, the more chance they have of success for their mission within the timescales they've got, which are normally related to their income streams from their investors.
And following you today, we've got panels from the Scottish Government and the UK Government. Is there anything you would request from both governments that could help the work you're doing and the work that applicants are having to do?
I think we work very closely with the governments and the Space Agency, and I should also say, we're very well supported by DFT in terms of funding. So there aren't very many things that we are concerned about. We have lots of benefits as an independent regulator as well. We're quite agile, so we're probably a bit quicker to react to some of the things that we see than other parts of government, which is just natural. I think continuing the ongoing engagements and relationships that we have is probably the most important thing.
And we have UK space strategies and Scottish space strategies. Do you feel there's good working between the two governments from what you can see? Is there anything that you would highlight in one over the other, or?
I don't think so. I think that the strategies for space are very challenging to do because space is moving so quickly. And as I said earlier, if I was sitting here 2 or 3 years ago, we'd all be focusing probably on the first launch and then be focusing on something else. So the strategies are quite difficult in space in particular. And the UK is not unique in also finding the challenges of linking the civilian strategy with the military strategy. And they're becoming closer aligned than they used to be, but that's also because technology is changing. So I wouldn't say there's much of a call-out between the two of them. The one thing I would say from the regulatory perspective, of course, is that I am very agnostic about the economic and growth aspects. So from my perspective, I always look at the strategies to make sure that none of the proposals risk the risk and impact on public safety or health or the environment.
And on that point, because I wanted to move on to it, do you think there's enough buy-in from the public? Do they look closely at applications, at the work you're doing, or do you think it only comes at the very end where there's a launch, be it successful or otherwise? Are we bringing the public along with us, particularly given that your key role is to keep them safe?
It's a very interesting question because my experience of doing this over the last few years and also being heavily involved in the media, which is relatively new to me, is that there's a huge amount of public interest in space. It generates a disproportionate amount of interest in many ways for the activities that we're trying to deliver, but they're also very engaged. So I would say that certainly from a STEM perspective, that's something we focus a lot of our effort on, and we also focus a lot of effort on working with the media in particular to share information. So openness and transparency from us as a regulator we view as critical. We try and put out as much information to myth bust as we can. And I would say a really good example of the challenges that we face, which is articulated in the media, was for the 2 or 3 months prior to Christmas before the Virgin Orbit launch, we had a lot of reports in the media that the CA was being too slow, too cumbersome, taking too much effort, taking too long. The day after the Virgin Orbit didn't reach orbit, the media was saying that the CA had done it too quickly, we didn't have enough skills, we didn't have the right capacity, and we got it all wrong.
Very familiar.
So that's quite challenging. I think we work really hard with the public and the media to get that information out there. There's always more we can do, but the Space Agency also do a huge amount in this area and are very supportive of it.
And you mentioned in your opening remarks about an update on a batch of new guidance coming out on Wednesday. Is that the way you do it? If something comes up, the way you put it across, and that maybe this isn't how you intended it, is you found some issues that you have to resolve in your guidance and you shove them all out in a oneer. Is that how you meant to describe it? Is that how it works? Or that seemed a bit strange?
Broadly. So what we don't do is...
If the guidance isn't working, why not change it straight away? Because others are in the application process? Or?
No. So it's... If there's something fundamental, we can change it more quickly. Mm-hmm. But rather than have lots of iterative changes, we try and gather them together and we do it in conjunction with feedback from industry and feedback from government and everyone else.
If we're looking at Wednesday, will it be big changes or is it things that we would probably expect and there's no major surprises?
There wouldn't be any major surprises, and if you're a space operator, hopefully you'd see them as helpful indications that we're listening and we're changing things to make it easier and better for you on the basis of the things that you've told us.
There is an ability to do it far quicker if required.
Depends. If it's things that we have control of, like informal guidance, we can do that quite quickly. Some of the other challenges that we have are legislative, so we obviously can't do legislative changes, and depending on government policy. So I have a legislative framework I work to, but I also work within whatever policy government has set. So I can't change. I can't change how we operate within that.
Although, ironically, you need that growth and the investment push for that side of things to get the government's attention, even though rightly, from a safety perspective, it's nothing to do with you. Is that fair?
Probably, but we feed back to government where there's particular problems, but we also take a very pragmatic approach in the CA in terms of what we try and identify for changes. So we can't change everything, but we can't change everything on our wish list because we haven't got sufficient resources to be able to just sit and do everything. So we prioritise it on what's coming towards us. So we look very carefully at the applicants that we have and the applicants we're speaking to, and we try and make sure that they are covered as best as we can. So some of the lower profile policies or missions where we haven't got any active applicants at this point in time, they're kind of parked. There's a little list of things that we might want to do there, but we're not going to use our resources to do that until we see someone coming forward.
And just finally from me, if I can, I don't know if you've been following our evidence, but we've had kind of conflicting views. Some are very happy with your work and they think the timeframes are very good. Others have said they've got their licences granted in Germany rather than the UK. Do you understand why companies are still doing that despite the progress that has been made, and what impact does that have with companies going out with the UK to get their licences?
The regulatory shopping is a global problem. Most countries would prefer entities to be regulated within their own shores. I think it's far more complex than saying they're going to Germany. As I said earlier, most countries have very different regulatory approaches. So quite a lot of countries around the world have got no space law whatsoever. Germany hasn't got a space law. But Germany...
Sorry, we've got a UK-based company that went to Germany to get their licence rather than getting it from you.
So I can't talk about individual cases, but what I was going to say was companies can go and choose where they want to operate from, but British companies who are operating space activities are caught by our legislation and they can't go and license somewhere else without other activities such as registering. So foreign companies can come and operate out the UK, but they have to set up a UK office to do so. It's not quite as simple as saying there's a decision based on one specific regulation, because you have spectrum for satellites in particular, and that's you have to have spectrum before you can operate. A lot of countries license their satellites based on spectrum without having much other consideration around things like orbital sustainability or national security. So it's very hard to say, because there's no global agreement on how to license satellites. So there's a lot of variation. I think, and the other part of this is liabilities and insurance. So different countries have different levels of liability and insurance. And then you get into the realms of, well, different countries also have different levels of financial support and investment. I think the UK package as a whole, in terms of the legislation, the legal framework, the liabilities and insurance we have, has led to lots of companies coming to the UK. That's why we've got 7 launchers. I have lots and lots of foreign companies who are trying to come to operate from the UK because they recognise the value in the UK legal framework and package as a whole, rather than just one element of satellite licensing.
When you see some that don't, that have the opportunity to license here and have the whole package here but go elsewhere, to Germany or elsewhere, do you look into that and see if it's just a financial thing with the liability? Do you look at maybe, are there lessons you can learn from other countries if there is this kind of what do you call it, regulatory shopping? So, if that's happening, how do you assess, are you still attractive then at that point?
On the basis...
Yeah.
No. I prefer to use evidence. From the evidence we have in terms of the number of applications we get, it's really not that simple to say why they're coming and why they're not coming, because it depends on a whole range of factors, which could be financial or legal or based on their investors. So there's lots of reasons why. We do work very closely with our partner regulators around the world. We're building a really good network where we try and be agnostic of economics. I would work closely with government who deal with the economic aspects. So, for example, we do charge £6,500 for a satellite licence in the UK. That's not to do with spectrum, that's just to do with the licence for the activities that we do.
Does that compare elsewhere?
Well, it's really hard to say because the standards aren't the same. So in the US, you pay for the spectrum, but not for the licence. And sometimes in the US, you have to pay for a bond for the spectrum, which is quite high. You get it back, but if you're a small company and you can't afford to lay money aside for a bond, that's where you start looking at other jurisdictions. So we do work with other regulators, and we look at what companies say to us in terms of why they've gone elsewhere. Sometimes we just don't hear, and some of those aspects are more related to the wider government policy framework, which the Space Agency and other government executives can talk to, rather than the safety element, which is what we're primarily concerned about.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair.
When did you permit?
I don't think there's anything, Chair. I'm very comfortable that Mr McLeod covered it in his replies to Douglas.
Yes,
Thank
of course,
you.
please.
Can I ask just one question to follow on from what Mr Ross was saying? It struck me when you were talking about the different regulatory frameworks and all the rest of it. You said that you feel it's very important that we have a distinctive space agency for safety to safeguard pressure from economic growth and commercial interests like we saw in Challenger, Piper Alpha. Is there a danger, or do you feel that other countries, to beg your pardon, other countries might not take the same attitude, and that might in some way undercut the UK?
At the moment, no.
Good.
So currently we see that it's different for all countries, but countries like the FAA and CNES in France and ESA and our partner countries in Australia, for example, and New Zealand, all follow an approach where the regulator is independent. In some of them it's not fully independent, but they've carved out processes within their administrations to make it a separate decision-making entity rather than those like the UK Space Agency who have grants and investments and have slightly different targets. Obviously, all the countries want public safety, but most of them are separate, either clearly separate until they need to by legislation, or are carved out administratively to be separate. Some other countries around the world don't always do that, but they're not necessarily following the same kind of values that we are in public safety.
Would you say that generally the public and companies, but specifically the public, can be reassured that the international approach is one which does put safety first and public safety? Absolutely. And if you speak to the companies, a lot of them will say very much that.
Thank you. And just lastly, from me, obviously, given responsibility for space regulation is added to your activities, is the resource equaling that? Or are you finding that you're getting the necessary financial support to take on these extended responsibilities? I know you're sitting here in the heart of UK Parliament, so you're highly likely to tell me any further resource would be welcome, but could you just give us a sense that you are securing the extra support that you need to do these new activities?
I think I'd contradict you and say I have no need for further resource at this point in time.
Really, that's the case. I think a select committee.
I think, as I said at the start, we were very lucky to set things up well. We included good contingencies, good optimism bias, and in some ways we're slightly helped because the sector didn't and isn't maturing as fast as they thought it would several years ago. So we haven't seen the volume of launch applications coming through in terms of their progress, but we didn't expect we'd see 7 launchers. So we're able to deal with the capacity. And I think the other really important point is we are a modern regulator, so we regulate, we don't license. So 5 or 10 years ago, you'd be talking about the Space Agency licensing satellites. We regulate activities, and we are then undertaking a strong element of monitoring and oversight for all of those activities throughout the lifetime of those assets. That's a bit of a shift. That does cause a slight burden for some of the companies, but other countries around the world are following that same way. And what we will see as we operate is probably the number of our team who are currently involved in licensing, which is around about 25, and we've got a team of 4 who do monitoring at the moment. That will shift over the coming years as we see more and more activities taking longer and longer timelines, and we'll have more and more monitoring and less licensing. And as long as we can do that at the moment, DFT have been really good at supporting us financially, and we've increased our budget over the last couple of years. We now have just over 60 full-time employees in the space regulator, which is very now comparable to what we see in America. So we don't license anywhere near their activities, but pro rata we are getting to the point where the optimism bias is just about being dealt with, and we're looking forward to the future to improve our monitoring and investing more and more time there, because that's also where we can deliver continuous improvement for safety for the public and for the operators.
Excellent. Well, thank you. It's very unusual way of somebody coming to a select committee, asking for more resources, but there's always a first for everything. But for today, thank you very much, Mr. McClelland. Anything else that you could usefully contribute to the committee, please let our clerks know in the usual way, but thank you just now. Can we have our next guest, please, which is Mr. McClelland and Mr. McGregor? Do you want to come in after?
What's it?
Read, yes, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, right. Is everybody all okay? And we now move on to our second session in our trilogy of sessions this afternoon to hear from the Scottish Government, and we have 2 Scottish Government officials with us this afternoon. If they could please introduce yourself, what your role is, and if anything by way of a short introductory statement. We'll start with you, Mr. McClelland.
Yes, good afternoon, committee. I am Scott McClelland, so I head up the Newmarket Clusters Unit within the Economic Development Directorate. Within SG, I'll maybe let Rory introduce himself, and then I'll give a bit of a context as to the unit, and then a little bit around how the Scottish Government sees the space opportunity going forward.
So I'm Rory McGregor. Hello everybody. I am a team leader within the unit that Scott heads, within the Newmarket Clusters Unit. Scott will set out some of the wider context. I have specific responsibility for the economic development aspects of space and industrial biotech and defence manufacturing.
Okay, Mr. McClelland.
Yeah, so as Rory's given a little bit of an allusion to the Newmarket Clusters Unit, our full kind of suite of responsibilities is split across kind of 2 teams. So on the one side, we've got responsibility for cluster development and policy, and that's really building a new programme to support the kind of growth of future clusters, and that's really around the implementation of some of the actions within the recently published Scottish National Innovation Strategy. And then the other side of the team that Rory sits on, we have specific responsibility for working with and growing a number of kind of priority sectors. So as well as the space sector, we also have the critical technologies cluster, which comprises quantum, photonics and semiconductors. We have the robotics and autonomous systems cluster. We've got industrial biotech, aerospace and defence manufacturing, and we've also got the Michigan Scotland Innovation Park up in Dundee. So quite a broad remit within the team. If I just give a couple of remarks around the kind of space sector and how the Scottish Government kind of sees it. So clearly, and I think the committee's heard in a lot of the evidence sessions, space is a really kind of fundamental aspect to modern life, and of course Rory and I used space services to actually navigate our way here today. From a Scottish Government perspective, we absolutely recognise the potential of the sector. And I think the latest market projections, there's lots of them and they vary, but I think we're looking in excess of $1 trillion by 2030. So it's really clearly a sector with a kind of huge global opportunity. And we've recognised that through a number of kind of government strategies, through the Inward Investment Plan, the National Strategy for Economic Transformation, and again, most recently, our National Innovation Strategy. You would have heard throughout a number of the evidence sessions, but I'll just kind of reiterate, some of the Scotland's kind of key strengths around the space sector. So really strong, particularly small satellite manufacturing based around the kind of west coast. Really strong data services and applications sitting around the kind of east coast. World-leading academic institutions that are doing kind of fundamental research into this area with activity that's participated in the James Webb Telescope and the detection of gravitational waves. We've obviously heard a little bit around launch capability, and we'll soon have that kind of gap closed, which will give us what we see as Scotland's real kind of USP in this area, and that's that end-to-end solution covering the kind of full value chain for small satellites. And the other aspect is we're doing it with kind of sustainability at the heart. It's really important to the industry in Scotland that everything is developed in the right way. And we've got a really kind of tight-knit ecosystem in Scotland as well, real kind of strength in partnership between the engagement of industry, academia and government. And I think that is demonstrated through the publication of Scotland's first space strategy, not a government strategy, but a joint strategy between industry, academia and government that I think kind of sets the foundations for future growth within the sector. There's a number of actions within that. And we're certainly committed to working in partnership with industry and academia to take activity forward. Thank you.
Well, thank you ever so much for that. And of course, you're right to reference the areas of expertise we have in Scotland: small satellites, data retention, acquisition, and also the other data services that we have. And having launched too is really exciting. I mean, what is your overall vision? Where would you see Scotland when you talk about $1 trillion by 2030? What's that going to be based on? We're hearing already that some of the technological issues around small satellites might start to becoming redundant. We're moving on to other things. Where do we go from where we are just now in Scotland's space sector?
Yes, so I think it is important to recognise those 1 trillion figures is at a kind of global level, and we're not targeting that from a Scottish level. We've obviously got a kind of joint ambition with industry and academia that looks at revenue figures and employment in the sector over the next decade, which are I think well kind of known by this committee. You're right as well in terms of we've got a lot of strengths at the moment, but it's very kind of clear that other governments across the world are investing heavily in the sector, and they are catching up really fast. And we want to make sure that we are on the kind of the forefront of technology and keeping ahead. And one of the aspects that we've actually committed, we've commissioned our kind of leading scientific body in Scotland, the Scottish Science Advisory Council, to look at a report to say what are actually the opportunities over the horizon, over the next 10 to 20 years, that builds on the strengths within the existing Scottish space ecosystem, that builds on the research activities that are underway through our current academic institutions, and where the market's going, so that what ones Scotland should be looking at, so that we're getting the kind of building blocks in place now to explore what those avenues are, again, beyond the current kind of strengths that we're staying at that kind of cutting edge.
Excellent. And obviously the UK government have their own space strategy, and we'll speak to representatives of the UK government next. And like, how does the Scottish space strategy differ in any way, or in any significant way, or are they roughly aligned? Tell us about the relationship between what you've put forward as the space strategy, what's been agreed, and the UK space strategy as it's currently set out.
Yeah, so I think the biggest difference between the strategies, of course, that the National Space Strategy is a government strategy. That is not what we have in Scotland. It is a joint strategy between industry, academia and government. Space is, of course, a reserved area, so you would naturally recognise that there is a lot more areas within the National Space Strategy that we don't necessarily touch upon in Scotland. But broadly, I think the direction is the same. We're both working towards the same direction, recognising the potential of particularly new space and supporting the development of the sector. Obviously, from our perspective, a very kind of Scottish-centric focus to that, but it plays a part within that wider UK ecosystem as well. So I don't think there's much in the way of difference or contradiction between the strategies, and I think it's reflective in the relationship between the Scottish Government and UK Government, particularly through the Space Agency colleagues, is very strong.
And the UK Government is currently reviewing the implementation of the Space Industry Act and the whole regulatory environment. Now, have you been involved in any aspects of that review?
So we have been invited to some of the workshops to kind of review that activity. So we have been involved in that. I think from our perspective, it's good for us to be participating in that. But more important from us is actually that the Scottish industry has that kind of voice in that area. And you've obviously heard from the engagement that Mr McLeod and the CAA have had with the ecosystem in Scotland. I think we would echo what he's been saying in terms of the strength of that engagement, and which we continue to welcome.
And obviously it's very exciting. We're probably going to have the first launch coming hopefully the next few months from Saxe-Vord, and this committee was lucky enough to visit that recently. Has the Scottish Government been fully supportive of the efforts, and what do you see as the significance of us being able to secure launch in Scotland for the first time?
It is extremely significant, and what has been achieved up there is brilliant. Rory and I have been up to site. We know Frank and the team really well. What does it mean? Take launch away, and I think Scotland still has a really strong space sector. But as I mentioned, I think the real key aspect for us is having that end-to-end capability. So in that instance, I think launch is absolutely critical to our ongoing activity and to our future proposition to the international market. I think, again, Mr McClelland mentioned a number of companies looking to undertake launch activity from Scotland. So there's that international attraction piece. And again, I think it's been touched on. We've got real strengths in satellite manufacturing, we've got real strengths in satellite data, but there's nothing quite like a rocket going into the air to inspire that next generation and really kind of capture the imagination of people. And so again, from a STEM perspective and an inspiration to future generations, I think it's absolutely massive.
So thank you. Whitney Chamberlain.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks both for being here today, and please send the Minister our best wishes. So I just wanted to ask about the investment decisions and approaches that the Scottish Government has taken. How has the Scottish Government determined how to prioritise investment in spaceports and launch capability?
So I think it's fair to say that we are supportive of all spaceports in Scotland that can deliver local economic activity. Spaceports, the actual funding and support that's been delivered for spaceports across the piece has tended to be at the operational activity. So investment and business support is generally handled by our enterprise agencies, so Scottish Enterprise, Highlands and Islands Enterprise, and most recently South of Scotland Enterprise. But certainly we're very supportive of all spaceports development in Scotland, and if together I think it gives a kind of complementary offering that provides a kind of wider access base, and the more capacity that is available, the more that we can attract from the international market, the better economically that will be for Scotland and the regions that the spaceports are situated in.
So when you say complementary, I suppose one of the things that we were very conscious of when we were up in March at Saxe-Vord was we attended there just after they had received the 10 million of funding from the UK Government. Obviously the Scottish Government had made a similar sized investment to the other spaceport at Sutherland. Is that the kind of decisions that are being made between both the governments, or has that been the Scottish Government has been more focused on Sutherland and therefore the UK Government has stepped in? Is that a characterisation that you would recognise?
I don't think that's necessarily the case, and I think the funding that has supported Sutherland initially, it was a UK competition, and there is funding going in from both Scottish organisations and UK. I think reflect, I guess, the High were originally leading the development of Sutherland Spaceport, so naturally we're investing in that. But the same as they support, multiple businesses in the same sector across the region, they would likewise support any business activity from the kind of spaceports, and maybe it's worth recognising as well the. Since Orbec's kind of taking over the development and lead for Sutherland Spaceport, investment from the Scottish National Investment Bank has been commercial funding and those decisions are taken on an independent basis, outside of ministers.
I'd certainly say in terms of Highlands and Islands Enterprises, funding originally at the time, way back in 2018, I think it was. I think it was probably came at a time before, I would say, arguably the Scottish Government had a formalised policy in place. Okay. So I guess you could argue that it's to High's credit that they recognised that before we'd even kind of started seriously thinking about space as a sector, rather than just on an individual project, individual business basis. Okay.
And on that then, where do you see the sector in 2 years' time? What does success look like in terms of the inputs that you're making?
So in terms of particularly from that kind of spaceport aspect, or just generally, what does the Scottish Government see the sector looking like in 2 years' time? What does success look like, given the variety of inputs that we're seeing going into it? Yeah, so I think we would expect to see continued growth in the areas that we have seen. Again, building on the existing strengths that we have. We would expect to see a bit more maturity in terms of launch activity and launches away from both Saxe-Ford and Sutherland, and moving towards, I guess, more of a kind of regularity in terms of launch cadence.
Okay. There's a messaging piece here as well, I think, in terms of the message is sent to the global community and the global ecosystem. That we are here and we've managed to deliver this. So it's,
And just finally, we did get from the University of Strathclyde, and this was co-authored by our special advisor, Dr. Malcolm MacDonald, is that the development of a national sustained space launch capability without a sustained government customer is probably unprecedented. What role do you see the Scottish Government going forward as a customer of the Scottish space industry?
Yeah, I think we've certainly recognised the role that we can play. I think we engage industry a lot and have heard the need to move away from grant provision towards that long-term customer base. So we're certainly looking at areas in our world of where we can become more of a customer of space services, space data. And I think there's also, of course, a kind of wider role around UK government as well, who maybe have a kind of larger customer base in this as well. But yeah, it's certainly an area that we recognise and we want to kind of take forward activities to explore what we can do in this area. And part of that is a better understanding and education across the industry and government to understand the capabilities that are on offering and how that can solve challenges that we face. I think there's certainly a huge opportunity within particularly a number of our agencies, SEPA, Nature Scot and the likes, to look at how they better use satellite data to deliver their services more effectively, and I think that goes across the piece. Equally,
I think there are some areas where agritech where you can obviously see synergies, but I guess some other ways it could be, if we played it cannily, there's really good ways of public service delivery in terms of the way the government does its business and local government does its business as well, and it could be really fundamentally transformed by this and taking learnings from, say, the fintech sector.
That's encouraging to see that you've recognised this gap here, but also that there's an opportunity for the government as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Douglas Ross.
Thanks, Chair, and good afternoon to our witnesses. And could I also pass on my best wishes to Richard Lochiel as MP for Murray. He covers the same area in Holyrood, and I know there's a lot of local support up in Murray for him to make a full and speedy recovery. So if that could be passed on, that would be appreciated. Could I start by just following on from Wendy Chamberlain's earlier comment? We have heard criticism during this inquiry about HIE's role in the two spaceports, Saxe-Ford and at Sutherland. Do you recognise any of that criticism that we've heard about early decisions that had been taken about more of the support from HIE, which is a body of the Scottish Government, going to Sutherland at the expense of looking at the benefits of both or Saxford above Sutherland?
So I should say the decision-making process was probably before our time, so we can't, I guess, comment on the activity. What we can say is, since we've certainly been in post, we're supportive of all spaceport developments, and we know that HIE are certainly willing and able to engage with Saxford to explore other opportunities to support the industry as it is looking to support the other spaceports across its region.
I mean, have the Scottish Government looked into some of the issues that have been raised? I know Minister Lochiel visited Saxford after there were some quite negative comments about the Scottish Government's engagement and HIE's engagement. Has that triggered some reflection within the Scottish Government, looking back at what was done, how it was done, and what could be done better going forward?
So my understanding is there was a kind of full review undertaken by HIE at the time that found there was no disproprietary activity within there.
I looked into HIE. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I believe so. Okay. From our perspective, we have a strong relationship with Saxford and particularly Frank and the leadership team. As you said, Mr. Lochiel met with that leadership team recently and is again expressed his willingness to explore what we can do to support across Scottish Government, and that means through our enterprise agencies and HIE, and they are certainly engaged in that.
The Chair was speaking about maybe some of the shift away from the smaller satellites to larger ones, and we certainly heard that when we had a committee visit out to the US. But you've mentioned the Scottish Government space strategy, but there's also Scotland's National Strategy for Economic Transformation, which says in it, it's space leading Europe in end-to-end capability for small satellite design, manufacture and launch. How reactive are your strategies to changes in trends? If we are seeing a shift away from small satellites, it's still in your most recent document, the Scotland's National Strategy for Economic Transformation. How are you adapting to the changing circumstances that we're hearing about globally, but also domestically here in the UK?
So within the Scottish Space Strategy, there is an aspect about looking at what those future commercial opportunities looks like that allows us to kind of pivot and support where industry identifies those commercial opportunities. I think we've heard a little bit of a mixed picture in terms of the size of satellites. We continue to have a really strong base within Glasgow that focus on small satellite manufacturing. They continue to see a very kind of strong view in terms of what their order book looks like, and they're developing the infrastructure in space that allows leveraging of existing constellations to bring down space data and services. So I don't think we've necessarily seen anything that causes us any concern at the moment. We've got activity around inward investment where we work with the industry to look at what are potential gaps and opportunities that we can look to kind of bring in additional companies, so we can take forward activity in that area. And ultimately, I guess if the industry sees a change in direction that you've recognised and spots the commercial opportunities around for it, is for them to explore and go after. And we will support in what ways they require.
Mm-hmm. But you're leading the strategy which enables and helps industry. So are you suggesting you're not seeing that shift? It's certainly something we've picked up quite a lot just as a select committee.
I think there's been mixtures. I don't think we've seen that conclusively. I don't think it's fair to say, or sort of right to say, that we are absolutely leading that strategy as well. The Scottish Space Strategy is a... Yeah. I know NSET...
But I'm slightly surprised that you don't see this shift away from the smaller satellites? I mean, it was certainly highlighted to us as a potential threat to the Scottish industry, that they built up this rightly built up this reputation for expertise in this area, but the global market seems to be moving away from the smaller cube satellites.
It's not something I necessarily recognise, and we will take it on board and look into it.
And just in answer to that, you went back to the Scottish Government space strategy, which I understand is industry, etc.
Yes.
I was actually taking my quote from Scotland's National Strategy for Economic Transformation. How much feed-in do you have to other strategies when there's a discussion about space in these other documents? Where are they getting their expertise from within those documents? Is that still your department, your office, or do they just look up the straight space strategy and think, well, that was published in 2021, I think it was, so we'll just copy that bit out of there? I'm just trying.
It does come from us.
So in that most recent document, you were still saying you wanted to lead the way in Europe, end-to-end capability for small satellite design. That was coming directly from you.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I then wanted to move on. Some of the other evidence that we've heard during our inquiry is about skills, and skills comes up not just in this inquiry but in many of the inquiries that we have looked at. And obviously education has devolved, but there is crossover between the skills needs and how that's developed by both UK and Scottish Government. Where do you think we are in terms of having the skills needed for the space sector at the moment, and importantly going forward? And how would you rate the working relationships between the Scottish and UK governments on this issue? Because clearly it's important to both, but ultimately with education being devolved, I think there would be more of an onus on the Scottish Government with this issue.
Yes, in terms of where we are at the moment, I think we recognise there are challenges across the industry, and as you rightly noted, those challenges are not unique to the space sector, but what the space sector has is a really strong growth projections that will need a significant increase in skills to kind of match that. I think one of the challenges that I think we've seen is a kind of clear articulation about what that skills need looks like. And I know the Space Agency are doing a lot of good work around the Space Skills Survey and the Space Workforce Action Plan. From our perspective, we don't engage too heavily in skills. So our skills agency, Skills Development Scotland, have participated in that activity and are working within the development of that space workforce plan. So in that respect,
joint up is that, because we probably all meet SDS in our constituency work, but they're obviously not specialists in the space sector or what's needed. So can you just explain how that would work? They've obviously got the specialisms for training and skills, but not the industry. So how does that all come together?
So within the actual kind of Space Scotland, so the industry body, there is a subgroup that is looking at skills, and Skills Development Scotland are a member of that group. So the industry expertise is provided from industry, and it's bringing together with Skills Development Scotland to engage across the ecosystem for education and learning to kind of support that activity. So yes, they don't have the specific space skills or space knowledge, but they work with industry, and the same as they do across all of the other industries.
And you think that's the best approach?
I think it is. I will admit I'm not fantastically knowledgeable when it comes to skills. That is why we have our skills colleagues and our Skills Development Scotland. They're used to doing that job, working with industry to understand what those needs are, working with colleges and universities to support the enablement of that activity.
Just finally then, because you mentioned colleges and universities, we heard from Fife and the City of Glasgow College, who did a joint submission to us, and in their written evidence, and I raised this when they were in front of us, speaking about the Scottish Government, they said, and I quote, "The Government needs to invest in skills. The sector simply cannot grow without the development of the talent pipeline that enables it." So this was very much a call to the Scottish Government to invest in skills and skills development. Is that happening, and what more can be done? What more resources can be put towards this issue, as you agree, is a potential barrier to the sector growing even further?
I absolutely recognise and agree with that, and I think it's fair to say that Scottish Government skills colleagues and the Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning has recognised that as well. What is happening at the moment in Scotland is a recognition of the need to transform that skills system, and that I understand is underway, and employers must form a kind of core part of that activity.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I just want to check for our own evidence. Do you accept there needs to be greater investment by the Scottish Government into skills, as Fife and City of Glasgow College have said in their written evidence to us?
I think that's right. I think so. Skills is going to be a massive increase in skills is needed across this sector and other sectors, and investment is needed. Absolutely.
Thank you both.
Michael Shanks. Thanks very much. Good to see you both, and similarly, I'll pass my best wishes to the Minister on his recovery. We hear quite a lot in the evidence that we've received in this inquiry around the place of SMEs in this industry. Do you think that's where Scotland's key place is with SMEs in the space sector? And I suppose what I'm asking is, do you think that's all our opportunity is, or do you think we should be doing a lot more to grow the SMEs into being much bigger companies? We hear a lot about SMEs and how great it is. We've got lots of SMEs, and of course it is. Is that the limit of our opportunity?
No, absolutely. And as you say, we're predominantly SMEs, and again, that is not unique to the space sector. What that is great for is enabling innovation and change at speed. But I think there is absolutely a need and a willingness to grow a number of those companies into larger SMEs and into the kind of middle size. I think there's also an opportunity, or Scotland does not have, as you noted, a kind of core primes in this area, and I think that hinders our ability in some areas to attract some of the larger opportunities, be that through the European opportunities or more central UK side. It is there is a need to. There's a balance of a change in the way that ESA, UKG might think about how it procures activity to move away from major primes, but also I think in Scotland the situation of some primes would certainly help in kind of freeing up the ability and say attracting larger contracts that can support further supply chain activity. So I don't. It is predominantly SME just now, but I don't think that is the scope or extent of our opportunity.
I'll come back to ESA because I've got a specific question that follows on just from what you were saying there. But I mean, what more can the Scottish Government do to support growing these companies? I mean, we know that a lot of the big investment funds are in London rather than in Scotland, but the Scotland House is in London specifically to try and encourage that networking between the SMEs and where the private equity is. So is there more of a role needed in this particular sector to bring that investment to Scotland?
Yes. I would say it's perhaps not unique to space, but space, like other deep tech sectors, are capital intensive, long return times, obviously heavily regulated, and new technologies that can be more risk from a private investment base. But yes, there's more that we need to do to work with existing investors and new investors to bring that activity into Scotland. I think it's something that the UK Space Agency also recognises and wants to do in partnership with us. So there's more that can be done there, and there is activity through our inward investment and trade colleagues as well, looking at what capital investment changes can happen in that side. And
the Minister probably wouldn't mind me recognising the fact that he's recognised that himself, and he was out in Los Angeles last October, and he basically had a meeting with members of the VC community out there as well to try and show the flag for the for the ecosystem in Scotland. So it is recognised.
And in terms of foreign investment into the space sector in Scotland, we had some evidence that there's an element of displacement when some of that investment comes in terms of the skills that are in Scotland, particularly those higher paid jobs in the sector where there just aren't enough people to fill jobs in various different companies. And I'll maybe ask specifically about Mangata in a minute, but that was one example of where there was some evidence given that actually people were just being poached from one job to another. So far from it being new jobs, it was just the same people moving to a different company. Have you any reflections, maybe linking slightly back to what Douglas Ross was asking around how we grow the skills base more generally so that there is actually opportunity for people in these higher level jobs?
Yeah, and I think there's an aspect around, and I think it's been touched on in previous evidence submissions about awareness and understanding of the opportunities in the sector, which will support more young people to enter the sector, but also support a transition from other adjacent sectors into opportunities within the sector. So activity and opportunities like Mangata help to kind of raise the profile of Scotland, and it's extremely disappointing that it hasn't worked out. But to grow the sector, people need to know that there are opportunities within the sector, and it's going to take a mixture of inward investment that will drive competition and growing our indigenous base. The same argument was probably used around the attraction of Spire, and that has turned into a fantastic success story for Scotland.
I mean, I suppose I appreciate that this isn't really a question for official levels, but in a number of answers you've said there does need to be more done, there does need to be more investment, there does need to be more focus. I suppose I would ask at what point do we start to see the fruition from that, and particularly in skills, because we've been hearing from colleges and universities for months now, and they've been making the case for years that they have the capacity and the capability to upskill in these new industries, but they just don't have the resource to do it, and that goes back to the Scottish Government. But I don't know if you have anything you would add to that, but I appreciate that that's a policy question rather than a civil servant question.
Yeah, sorry, I don't think we could give you an answer.
Okay. We'll put that to our minister, perhaps. Can I go back to the point you raised earlier about ESA? So Scottish headquarters companies get, I think, around 4% of that funding. What role can the Scottish Government play to encourage more of that funding to come to Scotland? Is there a mechanism to encourage more of that, or is it more difficult than that? What's our scope to encourage that to increase?
So it is slightly more difficult in that we don't have that direct relationship with ESA. That is, of course, through UK Space Agency, but the UK Space Agency, I think, recognises that figure and wants to do more about it as well. So we can work in partnership with the UK Space Agency and industry to see what we can do to kind of raise that figure.
Thank you. One of the things that was encouraging to us when we did visit the US and spoke to several figures in the space sector was just the knowledge of the Scottish space sector. I think they've actually recognised that we have got significant presence and that we do very well when it comes to small satellites and data acquisition. Do you link up with Scottish Development International to try and ensure that we get into the faces of the big players when it comes to the US particularly, and try to encourage them to look at Scotland? Because what we actually heard, particularly around the Bay Area with a lot of this activity, is that they're looking for places to branch out because activity is so expensive there with real estate and the cost of being able to get a workforce, the higher wages and living costs that are associated with that. What do you do? How do you make sure that Scotland is put in the frame as a place to come to and invest?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned, SDI are that kind of front door to that. So we work very closely with SDI to make sure that they are aware and able to represent what is going on in Scotland. And we've also worked with our colleagues out in the embassies to support showcasing some of the kind of Scottish talent and activity. And Scottish Enterprise are again looking at what activity we can do specifically in different parts of the US to look at R&D collaborative activity with companies in the US, and of course the Minister has been very much a kind of strong advocate for the industry and going out and kind of presenting on what the Scottish sector has to offer.
SDI are also standing members of the Scottish Government Space Group as well. Both
on your space,
both in terms of their inward investment side and the trade and export side.
And again, the other concern is that like companies becoming successful in Scotland, possibly on a smaller scale when it comes to the European market, being tempted and encouraged to relocate and resettle in the United States and access to a bigger market and like much more of a mature sector and industry. Is there anything that you feel that at an official level that we could usefully do to retain them, support them in Scotland, and make sure they continue to be a presence in our community?
Yeah, so I think it's fair to say that a lot of them look at that market and say, one, for the size of the market, and two, the availability of capital to support growth. So we are looking at how we work with industry to tackle a number of the areas that they've kind of noted as kind of holding or that will prevent future growth. So access to capital, infrastructure, all these kind of things. So there's one of trying to kind of solve some of those challenges that we have at the moment, but also recognising, I guess, the benefits of operating within Scotland, that kind of close-knit ecosystem to help kind of shape and drive activity, as well as working with colleagues at the kind of central UK level to support access through into other markets, across the kind of European avenue.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon to our witnesses. I'm going to go back a bit to take up a bit about the skills that my colleague Douglas Ross there was raised about skills being a devolved area for the Scottish Government, but that space is reserved, so there's that mix. And if I'm right in thinking, you said that, Mr McClelland, that the new market clusters unit, you don't do much about the skills. Is that right? And that, so could you just explain a bit more? How do you sort of look at the new market clusters in the space sector without looking at the skills as well? So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, so I should say, so there is obviously skills policy areas that have overarching responsibility for setting the direction and policy of skills in Scottish Government. That sits outside of us. What we do is engage with the industries in our respective areas to try to understand what is needed and what the kind of challenges they are seeing, to be able to kind of feed that back into the kind of central skills policy mechanisms.
Okay, thank you. So looking at the industry, the Space Skills Alliance said the skills gap are especially acute for SMEs, and Space Scotland has voiced concerns that currently the onus is on industry to provide and fund training, which for SMEs is a significant burden. How would you respond to that? Or is that what you're hearing from SMEs?
I think that is reflective of what we hear from industry as well.
So what would you propose should be done to ease the burden for skills training on SMEs from your point of view in the new market clusters unit?
So one of I think one of the challenges is around the numbers within the sector at this moment in time might not be as strong to actually change a kind of wider direction. So one of the things that we're trying to do across new market clusters is to aggregate what that demand looks like with a kind of greater understanding and I guess a greater kind of critical mass around it. It gives us more ability to influence internally to kind of shape and change the kind of central policy, central skills policy directions.
And that's the Scottish Government central skills policy?
Yes.
Okay. Does it need to be improved, the policy, in order to meet the needs?
So I think it's recognised that the system does need change, and there is a review underway at the moment that is looking at transforming that skills system.
Okay, thank you. Mr McGregor, do you have anything to add?
No, I think Scott covered it very well. I mean, there is a directorate that's devoted to skills policy within the Scottish Government, and we are right in the middle of a quite serious transformational change of the skills delivery landscape for Scotland. There was a review undertaken by James Withers, which reported back. Sorry, central skills not my area, so my dates will be fuzzy, but I think it was about a year ago or something like that. And the response for that was the end of last year, and I think they're now kind of moving towards that structural implementation side of things and the next steps from there. So there is a big change coming to the landscape.
Thank you. Mr Ross mentioned the Fife and City Glasgow colleges, who told us that access to space careers is often predicated on having a university degree. Further education colleges can play a greater role in meeting the skills challenge. Would you agree with that? And from the Newmarket Clusters unit point of view, how could you support them to do that?
Yes, so I think we recognise that absolutely, and I think there's a perception challenge that we need to tackle across space. And some of our other areas as well are perceived of you need a PhD in astrophysics or quantum theory to be able to work in these sectors, and that is absolutely not the case. So we need to provide a kind of a support to better educate and inform about the opportunities that are coming within this sector, which will spread across a large variety. From obviously we'll continue to need those very specialists with PhDs, but all the way down to kind of technician level. So there's a lot of activity there that we will need to do in conjunction with industry and our academic colleagues to understand what those pathways are and support activity through that.
The education pathways. Have you heard of the Baker Deering Trust and University Technical Colleges? That they've got UTC sleeves, so University Technical College sleeves aim to expand vocational education within existing mainstream secondary schools, and they replicate UTCs, including employer-based projects that develop skills, including employability skills, and they aim to enhance vocational education. And it's something that you should have a look at that. It's really interesting, because I think an initiative like that would, if we want to be one step ahead, we've got to start earlier than further education colleges. We've got to start right at 14 or 13. Mm-hmm. So it's actually something that all of us, the UK government and the Scottish government, really need to focus on, is getting in early and having an education pathway that leads to employment. Is that something, an initiative that would be worth looking at?
We would certainly be happy to explore.
Interesting. Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Did you conclude your questions?
Yes, I did.
Can I just ask then, about, obviously we heard from the CEA in the previous panel, and I mean, how you work with the CEA and other bodies to ensure a joined up approach to space regulations, and what are the particular challenges in doing this and trying to achieve that?
So in terms of CAA, yes, we have semi-regular engagement to understand what is happening and to understand the kind of feedback that we're receiving from industry to kind of feedback in that sense. I think the relationship is strong, and we've met with Colin, and the Minister has met with Sir Stephen on numerous occasions. So I think that works well. I think there's obviously, as Colin noted, there's a balance between making sure that it remains that kind of independent regulator outside of our side. But at this moment in time, we've got absolutely no complaints around the relationship with that, and I think that's echoed from what we hear from industry. Just
we've heard that the Scottish Government's Marine Directorate wasn't set up to process marine licence applications for spaceports. How are you supporting there for the increasing number of applications that are coming forward?
Yes, they weren't, but they use an existing licence that they are comfortable with processing, as the same journey that the CAA has gone through in terms of building up capacity, seeing more applications. They will become better at it, and processing times will increase. I think something to reflect, of course, is they are responsible for licensing in marine, and I think in the last 12 months there has been one space license in comparison to hundreds going on around offshore wind. So there is, of course, a balance of resource prioritisation. As we start to see a real kind of ramp up in that area, I'm sure we'll see a movement around more resource to support that activity.
We're just about to hear from the UK government about their space strategy. How often would you meet up with your colleagues in the UK government who are doing roughly the same type of activity down in Whitehall?
I think it's fair to say our engagement with our UK government DSIT counterparts hasn't been as strong. I know they've been through a number of changes. We've tended to be more strongly linked with our UK Space Agency colleagues, but we certainly welcome greater engagement going forward.
Maybe we could gently encourage them to come and speak to you a bit more just about the number of issues that you've obviously explored with us today. But thank you both ever so much, and I think you've heard the sincere best wishes from everybody in this committee to the Minister. We sincerely hope he gets better soon and hope to see him back on his feet in Parliament.
The Minister's not here, so we'll have to suspend.
Okay. Maybe we'll just have to suspend for a few minutes till the Minister is ready. So order.
The proceeding is currently suspended. 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 The proceeding is currently suspended.
And welcome back to the Scottish Affairs Committee and our third session of the afternoon. And we're delighted to be joined by the UK Government in the guise of the new Lord Cameron of Lochiel, and a welcome to you to this committee, and we hope to see much more of you in the future. And you're joined today by Dr Bate, who's the Chief Executive of the Scottish Space Agency. So what we'll do is we'll allow you to introduce yourself in anything by way of a short introductory statement. Lord Cameron.
Well, thank you, Chairman, for that warm welcome, and delighted to appear in front of your committee. And will, as you've just introduced, will be assisted here by Dr Paul Bate from the UK Space Agency, who hopefully will be able to cover off any technical issues that I'm certainly not qualified to speak to. I'd just like to say just a couple of things in opening. The first is to say that there's never been a better time, in my view and the government's view, to start and grow a space business in Scotland. There is clear local and national support, funding, opportunities and advice available. And I would also say that I think Scotland is punching above its weight when it comes to space jobs in the UK. After London and the South East, there are more space jobs in Scotland than anywhere else. 18% of all UK space jobs are in Scotland. I'd also like to say, Chairman, that I think this is an area where the UK government and the Scottish government are very closely aligned in terms of their strategic objectives. And I think we're all used to, there is a dispute between the UK government and the Scottish government, but I think in terms of space, there is an absolute alignment of interest and support. And in the short time that I've been a minister, I've seen how both at official level and sort of more widely, that collaboration, that sense of collaboration, not just between the two governments, but also between the hugely complex but varied sector that exists in terms of the private sector, academia and research. With those opening points, Chair, I'll leave it. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much. And we were, of course, expected to be joined by an official from the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology, and we were only informed on Thursday that she wouldn't be available to us. This followed the unavailability of Minister Griffith, who we understand is busy travelling just now, but we are disappointed that we couldn't hear from DSIT when it comes to such an important issue such as that, but we are grateful for your opening remarks. And maybe I could just start then. You're absolutely right at what we've found in this inquiry, which we're now almost concluded after several months, is that Scotland does have an excellence when it comes to the space sector. We're way ahead of the game when it comes to small satellite production and data acquisition and retention, so we have got a very thriving industry. What's your particular vision to grow that sector? What do you see as the way forward to make sure that not only do we retain our current situation, position within the European sector, but perhaps grow and progress it even further?
I think the first point to make is to highlight the importance of launch, if I could put it like that. You'll be well aware of the plans for Saxavord in Shetland and for the spaceport in Sutherland, which will hopefully come on stream next year. I think that is a hugely important part of UK government policy. The reason for that is that in terms of what Scotland can already do, it can already do a lot of what is upstream of that in terms of the commercial satellite, Chairman, that you've referred to, commercial small satellite production in places like Glasgow, and also a lot of the downstream work in terms of data collection, data analysis, the work of our universities in Edinburgh, Glasgow, Heriot-Watt. But the one thing that we do not yet do is launch, and that is, in effect, the missing piece of the jigsaw. And I think by ensuring that goes ahead, and the UK government, as you'll know, in the spring budget committed £10 million to Saxavord. By ensuring that goes ahead, it's such an iconic part, but it's actually an absolutely critical part of the space sector in Scotland. And I think that's one of the foremost things that we can do.
So, and of course this committee did visit Saxavord recently, and I think we're very impressed with the progress made. We're all quite excited about launch being able to come to Scotland. And I think, as we've heard earlier, that it does complete the full range of activities from Scotland. But what do you say about the concerns about the UK's space strategy? And it's like so many strategies we get from various governments. I'm not just saying the UK government, it's all there with ambition, what it would hope to achieve. It's perhaps just a little bit more woolly on the detail side of things. How do you respond to those type of criticisms that it's great in aspiration but not so detailed when it comes to exactly what it's going to do?
I think it is a high-level document. It sort of delineates the various ambitions in quite sort of wide and general terms, and it is also almost 3 years old. What I would say, Chairman, I think it has to be read in conjunction with the two government documents that have followed on, namely the National Space Strategy in Action document that dates from July last year, and also the Space Industrial Plan that was recently published in March. And I think that gives certainly more detail and more specific pragmatic policies that perhaps we could come on to later.
We most definitely will, and you're right that the industrial plan does include that further detail, but like the other strategy, I mean, there's not all that much more. I'm interested in the view of Dr. Bate, who I'm pretty certain was part of bringing forward these documents. What do you feel at that criticism? It's like so much that was seen in this. It is great on ambition. We like ambition, obviously, but where's the detail about how we achieve this?
The document said was published in September 2021, so just before the spending review, and the government needed to make its decisions on spending. So I don't think it would have been appropriate to put the money into a strategy document at that time. But what then followed is that the Minister said there's been the subsequent documents, but there was also the comprehensive spending review setting out the funding, including the funding for space over the following 3 years. So that, alongside the UK Space Agency's corporate plan, we don't have the sole locus for delivery against the National Space Strategy, but we are one of the main delivery bodies. We were able to go into significantly more detail across 8 separate priorities under space, obviously consistent with furthering the space strategy, but in each case costed annually and over the 3 years, and we've been delivering on that since.
Thanks for that. And obviously, a lot of the activity we have here in Scotland is small and medium enterprises, and I'm just wondering, and this is probably for you, Minister, if you don't mind, are we confident that the voices of SMEs and Scottish space companies are being heard clearly enough in Westminster?
We are confident, Chairman, that they are being heard. I think, as I'm sure you'll know from the evidence you've already gathered, that out of the 1,600 or so companies operating, the vast majority are small companies, and that's true in Scotland as well. I think in terms of that part of the sector, it's true to say that they have flourished. There are small to medium-sized companies, Spar Global and Clyde Space in Glasgow, the satellite producers. But also, UK government policy is to try and sort of not only allow them to flourish, but also help them. So, for one example, the Space Clusters Infrastructure Fund is something that I'm sure Dr. Bate can speak to as well, is an example of the UK Space Agency contributing, I think, £47 million to that fund. And that has, for instance, helped a company in Dundee, Smith Interconnect, by contributing £1.9 million to that company. So that's a smaller company. There's more to be done, undoubtedly. One of the points I think important to make is that seed funding in sort of earlier rounds was less focused than perhaps it could have been. And I think there is a realisation that in later rounds there could be potential for a lead investor to be chosen, to be funded, upon which smaller companies could sort of piggyback upon. So it's that kind of innovative thinking that I think we'd be keen to see.
I would be keen to hear from Dr. Bate about the £47 million of funding. I mean, is this enough to satisfy the demand that we have from the SMEs in Scotland?
So that particular fund, I think, was over 4 times oversubscribed on the funding.
It's 4 times oversubscribed.
4 times oversubscribed. So it's the first time that we've put a substantial amount of money into clusters infrastructure specifically. And I think we've shown just how much there is a pull from the sector right across the UK, because we are a UK space agency. But my previous job before this job was growing as part of an SME and going all the way through to a flotation. So I recognise the challenge in getting people's attention. But I would say that it's not just whether the voice is heard in Westminster, it's also how much the Space Agency goes up and is part of the Scottish set of communities. So when I'm up there, I'll be up again in Glasgow on Monday. We talk all the time. I know a lot, or I feel I know, not least about the launch sector, how Orbex have made their £16.5 million initial raise on their Series C, how Saxford Spaceport is doing, how Star Dundee are doing, and Spar Global and AAC Clyde Space and so forth. But there are 183 companies. I'm not saying I know them all. I think the voice is heard clearly, which is also down to people like Space Scotland for convening the industry across Scotland. But we're absolutely right. Although we don't have, and you heard evidence about this, a large indigenous prime in Scotland, the growth in the sector, and growth in all high-tech sectors, typically comes from the SME base. So the fact there is such a strong base in Scotland is positive.
And of course, we've heard that Scotland only managed to secure some 4% of all the ESA, European Space Station funding, which, given our population share doesn't really match up at all. What are we doing to address that? What are we doing to ensure that we get something more like our population share of the funding that's available through what is probably the biggest funder that we have available to us in space development?
Yeah, if I could briefly answer that and then perhaps turn to Dr. Bate. I mean, I think the ESA funding has been beset with 2 issues. Firstly is the cost of applying, and secondly there is a sort of, I think, a difficulty of understanding the kind of best way of bidding for ESA work. But I think we are, that is improving. The UK Space Agency is doing a tremendous amount of work in terms of hubs, etc., bidding advice to help companies. And I think Dr. Bate probably best to outline what that is.
Thank you. Let me turn to ESA in 1 second. It's worth saying that all of the non-ESA funding, 15% of all that funding from the UK Space Agency goes to Scottish organisations, but it is 4% or 4.1%, as you say, for the ESA side. And as the Minister laid out, we having recognised that, even though it is for ESA to make the decisions, not for the UK Space Agency to make decisions on who is funded within the UK, those are sort of the rules of the game. The best thing we think we can do to help is to support individual organisations to bid well, to be aware of what is available and when, and the full range of different options, all of which we do, from the business incubation centre work, the free labs and so forth. But we're also seeing cautious reasons for optimism. In the last 12 months we've seen significant improvements, and we can provide the committee with that data. Since 2015 we've seen a 25% increase in the funding going through.
That's encouraging. What we're sort of hearing is the wrong type of applications that seem to be coming from Scottish companies, and how do they get it wrong if everybody else in the United Kingdom seems to be able to get it right?
I wouldn't say everybody in the United Kingdom always gets it right, so these are competitive right across Europe. And we don't, although we do win, we don't always win. Because in the rest of the UK there are sometimes larger companies. To take one example, but it's not the only one, Airbus UK, for example, largely in Stevenage and Portsmouth, they will have larger teams. They're perhaps more used to bidding into to ESA and have more heritage and confidence, or larger teams who are able to support.
Michael Shanks.
Thank you, and thank you both for your time today. At the beginning you spoke, Lord Cameron, about the UK Government and the Scottish Government being closely aligned. In terms of strategy, we're quite closely aligned. On a practical level, do you think there's ways the two governments could work better together?
I think there's a lot. I mean, I think it's worth acknowledging what's happening already. I think on a practical level, a good example of this is Launch, actually, where you see a Scottish Government agency, Highlands and Islands Enterprise, contributing to the launch site, the local knowledge that's required. And you then have UK Government in dialogue with the commercial companies involved. And those two, that's a good example of UK Government, Scottish Government dovetailing, one taking perhaps a sort of wider, more commercial, having a wider commercial relationship, the other using local knowledge on the ground to help. I mean, I think there's other examples of collaboration. The UK Government co-funds Space Scotland. There's been collaboration over the Space Workforce Action Plan. There's been collaboration over the regulatory review. So I think on the ground there are practical examples of that happening. And I've actually, in light of this evidence session, I've asked my officials in the Scotland office to set up a round table in Edinburgh, in Queen Elizabeth House, where the UK Space Agency will soon have a place to work from, and that round table would I hope see members of the Scottish Government, both at ministerial and official level, UK Government, the agencies involved, and the wide ecosystem of commercial companies and research and academic institutions. And also welcome any members of this committee who want to come.
There's a positive outcome before we've even published the reports. So that's fantastic. I suppose with an issue like this, it's an emerging issue within government that hasn't been thought about in the past. So we've got Ministry of Defence involvement, Department of Transport, Department of Business and Trade, Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, UK Space Agency, Civil Aviation Authority, UK Research and Innovation, and that's just in the UK government. Some of the evidence that people have given us is that there's nobody really in charge, and that although there's on paper a space minister, actually lots of different people all take different responsibilities, and the coordinating of it all is something that really government could improve on. Do you think there is something more the UK government could do to just have a kind of cohesive ministerial responsibility for this, or is it actually inevitably splintered between different parts of government?
I think it's the latter. To be fair, it's a very fair question. I think the point is that space itself is a relatively amorphous concept, and that filters down into government. Responsibility is dispersed because of its very nature. But I think it's also right to say that UK government is trying to drive activity across the various departments that are involved. It's just very difficult, I think, to compartmentalise it into one minister and one portfolio. As you'll be aware,
you recognise that people said to us, though, that what that means on the outside is that they don't know where to go in government, that there isn't a clear route through. So if you're a Scottish company, do you go through the Scotland office, or there doesn't seem to be anyone that's in charge of, for example, launch in the UK. Who is the minister that is the go-to person?
I think I'm sure, and I wouldn't doubt any of the evidence that you've heard, but I think, as I say, it's just very difficult to compartmentalise it. I think you have, obviously there's a defence element to space. You have DCIT running civil space policy. Under that you have the UK Space Agency working on delivery of programmes, and then DFT and the Civil Aviation Authority responsible for regulation. I mean, there is a, and I take the point that perhaps there could be better mapping of the governmental system, but ultimately I think it's just very difficult to pin it down.
And Dr. Bate, some of the evidence we've heard, particularly in Scotland, is around the role of SMEs in this sector and how important they've been, particularly around innovation and particularly some of the university spin-outs and things like that. But what more do you think we could do to encourage those companies to grow beyond being SMEs into being some of the bigger players in this market? Do you think Scotland has potential to host some of those companies?
Yes, so at the moment with 180 million of revenue and 183 companies, you can see that the average amount of turnover per year is relatively small. It seems to me that in addition to the things that we are already doing by way of sort of supporting through grants and R&D and the ESA workshops we discussed, ultimately having a strong customer base and a strong investor base is what will drive those scale-ups and to go from SMEs to the next stage and onwards into really big revenue and profitable businesses. So one of the programs that we now run at the agency, which is called the Unlocking Space for Business, is to take the opposite view to the traditional, how do we just support the R&D of the space sector, and look at it from the other. What does financial services and the transport sector need from space, and where are we seeing barriers to them working well together? I think it's important that we continue to fund those sorts of programs as well.
And one of the things we've talked a lot about is skills in this sector, which of course has devolved to the Scottish Government. But what do you think we could do on a UK basis to really improve partly understanding of the skills you need and the qualifications you need to reduce this? Something Sally Ann Hart's been focusing on in earlier sessions around breaking down this idea you need to be PhD qualified to get a job in space. That could be a UK-wide initiative, and particularly at getting into schools at an early stage. Is there anything more the UK Space Agency could do to support that work?
Nothing wrong with a PhD, but
absolutely, Dr. Bate.
But you're absolutely right. 77%, I think, at the moment of people in the space sector have a primary degree, and we do need to break down some of the barriers that people think that it is only there for people who want to be an astronaut or astrophysicist. So we start around about the age of 11. And work our way up. We have a program which is called Space to Inspire, which is literally that, to help people to understand what, just how exciting space is. We took our replica rocket on our UK tour of 13 different sites, including Aberdeen and Glasgow. Precisely so that people could become more aware of what the space industry really is, everything from the design side and the marketing and the communications and the finance. But we also invest right throughout the secondary curriculum in a Space to Learn programme. And these are substantially bigger programmes than they've ever been in the past. The one thing we're very clear about here is it is absolutely lovely to go into a school, particularly if you bring badges and pens. But it only really, we know the evidence says it only creates value if these are part of ongoing programmes embedded in the curriculum. So we work with the STEM Learning Centre, we work with Zero UK to make sure that we're skilling up teachers to be able to teach the STEM curriculum through space, for example. Then as we work more into the skills agenda for people who are either about to go into the field or perhaps are in an adjacent field but could come in, there we look at things like what we call them space internships or spinternships, of which I think there are 130 and 30 of those in Scotland. So what we're trying to do is sort of build up those stepped elements, so we really are taking everyone, whether you're a 10-year-old in Dundee or you're all the way through to thinking about what your choices are now you've got your degree or you've got your apprenticeship. We are crying out for RF engineers, systems engineers, software engineers, and financial people, finance people, HR people, design people. 49,000 is not a bad start for the number of people employed across the UK in space, but there's so much more that we can do with people.
And some of that sounds really good and really exciting, and as a former teacher, always great when people came into tenure classes with pens and whatever else. But can I just on the Space Workforce Action Plan, there's been some feedback during this inquiry that maybe it does place too much emphasis on the rockets and the astronauts and that aspect of things, which creates maybe a misleading idea that that's what a job in the space sector would involve, rather than the full diversity of jobs that are available in the sector. Do you recognise that criticism at all? Is there anything you might do differently?
Absolutely recognise the criticism. I also think it's for some people it's the moment of inspiration for them. So I think the trick is not to just have one thing. We don't just invest in the replica rocket. So we look at the whole range of things that might excite people about space. So we will talk in the curriculums about what it takes to mitigate the climate emergency through using satellite data. We've recently just had the finals of something called the CANSAT programme, which is for 16-year-olds there or thereabouts in any school across the UK to compete to launch a very small can-sized satellite up into the atmosphere and then take data from it, so they can, their interest might be about photographing their school or the local environment, seeing how that might work for planning in the future. There are multiple different touch points.
Can I just ask one final question about the Space Agency itself? In 2021, you'll recall the Civil Service People Survey found that there were extremely high levels of bullying within the organisation. I think the highest level of bullying of any part of government. In fact, 1 in 5 reported experiencing bullying. And there was a review launched after that. Is there any update on progress towards improving that situation?
Yes, absolutely. It was and remains much higher than it should be, because we don't tolerate any. In the most recent staff survey results, with the amount of reported bullying and harassment has dropped by over a third, which we're pleased to see, but it's, as I say, still too high. One other thing that I think we can draw some encouragement from was in the year of the survey that you referred to. I think across all organisations, just over 100 civil service organisations, the space agency staff who did report bullying and harassment were relatively low down the rankings, around 80th, for whether they would feel willing to report that formally. Because one thing to say it in the survey, it's quite another thing to feel confident and safe enough to report it to HR. That's now changed so that the space agency reports we're the second most likely organisation. Our staff say, relative to other organisations, they're the second most likely to feel safe to report. And that's what we've been working on in the 2.5 years that I've been in the job, is the safety to bring yourself to work, and if something is not right, to be able to speak up about it.
Thank you. Just before I begin, Douglas Ross, just one issue around skills, and it's just a bit of supplementary evidence that we've received from one of our most important Scottish-based companies, CEO of Alba Orbital, and it's the concerns about the removal of design engineers from the skilled worker visa list. And what they're telling us is that they might have to start hiring engineers in Germany instead. Would it be something that could be considered that we'd get satellite engineers or those type of skills back on that list, given that this is a developing sector that needs that specific skill and talent?
Well, I can certainly relay that back to the department chair. I mean, what I would say is that I think I'm right in saying that the new ISL is open to review during the course of the year, and I think it would be obviously important that any company or any organisation involved would contribute to that. It's very important from government's perspective that we hear from companies, employers, etc. I think I'm right in saying that those figures are set by using median earnings in the various categories. And the reason for that is obviously it's seen as a fair way to set an earnings level. And I imagine
the figures are, I mean, it's a doubling from £27,000 to £50,000 for minimum salary. I mean, that's a massive increase. And, you know, like, I think this is a genuine plea, and it's from one of the space companies. And I'm encouraged that you'll have a look at this. Because I'm pretty certain when we come to compiling a report, this will be a feature of that. I mean, skills have been such an important issue. Sally Ann Hart, as Michael Shanks has said, has been raising this consistently. We want to do everything which we can to support the sector. But I thank you for that contribution. Douglas Ross.
Thanks, Chair, and good afternoon, Minister and Dr. Bate. And Minister, it's good to see you at committee in your first appearance, and I'm sure you will be a regular attendee here at the Scottish Affairs Select Committee. I wondered if I could start with you just in your previous role, obviously as a member of the Scottish Parliament. You represented a region that is now critically important to the launch of these satellites, looking at Shetland and Sutherland. How did you view, before you became into your ministerial role, the impact this would have on communities? If you think about Unts being, an area very far north, obviously, and the more traditional industries up there, how much is this investment and the increase in activity having an impact in the local communities?
I think it's, and I thank you very much for your welcome. And having in a previous life stood as a parliamentary candidate for Orkney and Shetland. Admittedly, almost 10 years ago, I'm acutely aware of the importance of these kind of industries generally, but just these are very remote, very rural communities, and investment like this is an absolute game changer for them. It brings in, not just during the construction phase, but I think it brings in a huge amount of jobs, most importantly, but also investment, interest in the area. And as someone who's very proud to represent the Highlands and Islands for 8 years in the Scottish Parliament, it's an absolutely tremendous achievement, I think, for all those involved. That's why HIE, I think, contributed what they did. I think that this is the principal development agency of the Scottish Government, and it's also why the UK Government has supported it too. And it's a sign, I think, of both of Scotland's governments recognising that.
Do you accept as well there are other infrastructure challenges that come with the development, be it at Sutherland or at Saxiford, and there will have to be some emphasis placed on upgrading some of the critical infrastructure? I know there's certainly the campaign to have tunnels from the Shetland Isles out to Yell and then up to Unst. Will that be an important part of the process for both the UK? I think the UK Government have been asked, and the Scottish Government, in terms of matching the local infrastructure for what will be nationally critical spaces of expertise with the launch pads.
Absolutely. It is critical is the word you use. I mean, the necessity to upgrade the transport infrastructure, telecoms, the entire gamut of different types of infrastructure that not only locals rely on anyway, but the investment and the infrastructure that is being created through the space sector, I think it is absolutely fundamental that happens.
Dr. Bate, earlier on you were speaking about the engagement you have in Scotland, and you're up in Glasgow next week. I asked this question earlier. How does the Scottish space industry at the moment compare to the industry elsewhere in the UK and indeed around Europe and across the globe? Obviously, we are the leading producers of small satellites. I think we produce more in Scotland than the rest of Europe combined. What areas is Scotland doing particularly well in, and what areas within the space sector do you think Scotland maybe has an opportunity to go even further?
So we tend to look at three particular areas of strength. So the small satellite design and manufacture, and the downstream sort of data and applications side, particularly based around Edinburgh, and then the launch sector, both in Sutherland and Saxiford and Unst. However, I think it's what you then see other companies that may not be in those areas, but still have these opportunities to be even doing really well, but better than they are. So if I just take the example of Star Dundee for a moment, who do something called Spacewire and Space Fibre, and that's on board on the satellite, doing the data networking, the IP cores. The standard Spacewire has been adopted by the European Space Agency. That's really, when you think about how many satellites are being built by the agency, you can see how that could be real growth. They have real respect in the global community. While I think those three individual subsectors are all important and all showing growth, it's by no means just those areas. And I always think it's good that we know where there is already strength, but we have to create that ecosystem where anybody can, with a good idea, can feel the opportunity to grow and can get the support as well.
And you've both mentioned launch. Indeed, Minister Cameron, that was your starting point for your contribution here, and Dr. Bate, you've just reiterated that. Obviously, we've had a launch already in England that wasn't as successful as people had hoped for, and potentially one in Scotland quite soon. How well do we prepare the public and to a lesser extent decision makers, because they're involved in this, but there will be a large element of failure in space, and particularly in launch. And do you think we have the messaging right that if it doesn't go 100% successful, albeit it has to be 100% safe, the first time from Saxiford or from Sutherland, there are so many other opportunities? Do you think there's been enough work done for the public to understand that a failure actually brings many successes with it, because people understand better what they have to improve on for the next successful launch?
Well, I think the Virgin Orbit launch from Newquay in Cornwall showed that we had done laid the groundwork, because although there was huge disappointment, I think across the country and across the sector, the fact that we were able to get the message out that space is difficult, that we see this, and we've seen this around countries around the world have had recent launch failures. It is part and parcel of getting to space, is how complicated it is. It wasn't seen as some unmitigated failure never to be repeated. I think it's very important that we didn't invest in one sole spaceport, but instead had a competitive approach to our launch programme from the very start. There were 7 different spaceports, for example, across the UK, looking at the ones that the Space Agency has funded, in particularly the launches for. That includes both the Orbex launch from Sutherland, likely next year, and the Lockheed Martin launch with ABL from Saxiford, which will also be next year. That's important too, so we're not putting all our eggs in one basket or one rocket, because we're not talking about SpaceX, who have gone through their failures and on their Falcon program now launch around about twice a week. But they have had 3 recent Starships, each of which have achieved something they've got a lot of data from, but haven't all been successful yet. But nonetheless, our companies, whether that's Orbex or Skyrora, or indeed the other companies like Rocket Factory Augsburg that will launch from Saxiford hopefully later this year, they are in their very first launches. So we shouldn't expect a 100% launch record.
Just to go back to some of the areas that Scotland has up until now certainly led the way in particularly the development and the production of small satellites. We heard when we were in the United States as a committee looking at this as one of the inquiries we were taking evidence on, that there is a shift away from more of the smaller satellites to larger satellites, partly due to the reduction in the cost of getting the larger satellites into space. Is that a trend you are seeing, and does that then lead to a potential threat for the Scottish sector, which has invested quite a lot in the production of smaller satellites?
So I'd expect to see those CubeSat size satellites continue to grow, but there are definitely.
Sorry, just.
Sorry, the
size.
No, sorry, the market for CubeSats to continue to grow. What we are seeing is there are certain subsectors. So, for example, the communications sector at the moment is seeing a move to larger satellites from the frozen. They've had the really big ones in the geostationary orbits, but what we're now seeing is more like the 150 kilogram plus satellites in those mega constellations, whether that's OneWeb or or Starlink or Kuiper. But that's very different to the Earth observation sector, and where those CubeSats can be very, very valuable. So I think we will see so many different use cases for space, and they are growing, that there is more than enough room both for the CubeSats and for the larger size of small sats.
If you were giving advice to companies, would you say to stick with what you're doing with the smaller ones, or to also incorporate this move towards some of the larger ones as well? Do you see the trend ultimately moving away from the smaller ones, or will there always be a need for what's being produced in Scotland and world leading at the moment?
Yeah, I would not give advice that says get out of CubeSats and get into 150k plus satellites. I'll go the other way and be saying, what are your capabilities and where have you invested and what's your customer pipeline? So when I have conversations with Spire Global or AC Clyde Space, for example, those are the sorts of conversations we have. I was looking at Spire Global's share price over the last year. That is stable or slightly growing. So the markets are suggesting that they have a viable future. That's a $300 million market cap organisation. But going back to the earlier question, the thing that unlocks the real value is the recurrent contracts and the investment. So that's where I would start the conversations.
Maybe back to yourself, Minister Cameron. We've spoken about skills, and indeed in our earlier session, I was encouraged to hear that the Scottish Government believe there should be more investment, because we've heard that from our witnesses, that there needs to be more investment by the Scottish Government. That's an area that is devolved to them. An issue in terms of wider employment is what people do when they leave various sectors, and I wondered if we need to do more to tap into not just young pupils at school and what they choose to do at college or university, but also people transitioning. If we look at Orbex, it's based in Forres in my constituency. Certainly in the early days, a lot of the staff that were employed there had built up a considerable amount of experience in the military, either at Area Lossiemouth or Kinloss Barracks. So I wonder, is there more the UK Government can be doing to promote that movement from careers where some expertise has been built up, that actually it would be very well suited to being involved in the space sector?
Certainly, I mean, any discussion of skills should always involve the issue of reskilling as well as upskilling, and it's a fundamental part of what we, I think, call the skills agenda, and that's as true for UK Government as it is for the Scottish Government. I think it's worth recognising what the UK Government is doing already on a much wider scale, not just in terms of space, but in STEM in general. I point to a roundtable that my colleague John Lamont held in January of this year in Edinburgh, which involved STEM, trying to promote STEM within Scotland, in which industry leaders and academics, etc., attended. STEM itself is a priority of the Prime Minister and UK Government more generally. There are, I think I could point to the UKRI STEM Ambassadors Programme, which is hugely important, as well as the Turing Scheme, which is obviously been set up. So I think there is a recognition that not just in terms of skills in the space sector, but more widely, we need to do significant amount to help.
And just finally from me, Chair, if I can, one of the other challenges that we're seeing in Scotland is decisions by the Scottish Government to make Scotland the highest tax part of the United Kingdom. That is having an impact on recruitment and certainly retention in some sectors. We've heard earlier that certain jobs within the space sector are particularly well paid to encourage the best people to come. Is there a risk, Minister Cameron, that if Scotland continues to have this reputation of being the highest tax part of the United Kingdom, then we will struggle to recruit the best and the brightest to come and take these highly paid jobs?
There is a risk, and the increasing divergence of the two tax systems is creating that, and that's a risk that I have, just as a minister in the last 3 months, I've had people talk to me about in terms of different sectors, and in terms of both recruiting and retaining. It's a clear risk.
Thank you both. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Sally Ann Hart.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon to our witnesses. I'm going to go back a bit on skills. because I think we all know there are huge skills gaps, and whilst the government's doing a lot to try and deal with these, with the focus on STEM subjects and the Prime Minister's maths focus to try and get everyone up to for the future jobs in AI, space sector, etc. Both governments are a bit reactive to the skills need, and they need to be one step ahead. They need to be 3 steps ahead. And Dr. Bate, you mentioned Space to Inspire and the rocket tour. Thank you. They came to Hastings, and really was fantastic to see some of our children dream about future careers, not just as astronauts, but in the whole space sector, whether it's nursing or tourism or whatever else is there. It's much bigger, the space sector, than just being an astronaut or having a PhD in particle physics. So I don't even know what that is. But I mentioned to our witnesses, Mr. McClelland and Mr. McGregor, who are there from the Newmarket Clusters Unit, about university technical colleges. So Lord Baker with Baker Deering Educational Trust, they're very successful, and there is an initiative called the UTC Sleeves, which aim to expand vocation education within existing mainstream secondary schools, so they replicate the university technical colleges, and including employer-led projects that develop skills, including employability skills, which aim to enhance the vocational education so that you get that education pathway to get those new skills. So is this something both you, Dr. Bate, from the UK Space Agency point of view, think is an initiative that needs to be explored more fully? And then over to Lord Cameron, is that something that perhaps you could discuss with the Education Department and maybe Lord Baker himself about that sort of initiative that we really need to think about? So let's go back, let's start people earlier, get them an education pathway, and then we've got those skills to fill those jobs. So we're thinking ahead?
Wholeheartedly, yes.
Okay. Can you do it?
I'm more than happy to take that up. I mean, I think it's a UK-wide issue. I think in the survey last year, 52% of respondents to that survey said that they didn't have the requisite skills. Exactly. And I think there was particularly, Dr. Bate will correct me, but I think there were particular issues in engineering, software engineering, and electronics in particular, as well as the highly specialised spacecraft operation jobs. But another thing that emerged from that survey was about, I think I'm right in saying, about half of the respondents also said it's very hard to predict what jobs will be needed in the sector in, say, 3 years' time.
It's changing so quickly.
It's changing so quickly, and that goes to the point you've made about trying to prepare for that change in the knowledge that it's difficult to foresee whether jobs will be needed.
Much earlier. So I'm going to thank you. I'm going to go back to the Space Workforce Action Plan. So I know Minister Griffiths announced in April that should be published before the summer recess. How far is that ahead? Is it on track to be published before the summer recess?
So I have no further information than you do. I am advised that it is due to be published before the summer recess, and I've had no indication that there's a delay to that.
Thank you, Dr. Bate. Have you fed into it?
Yes, we do. And yes, my understanding is it's still due to be published before recess.
Is it going to be good news?
I think anything which pushes forward skills in space is good news.
Very charming attempt to get the answer there.
Well, we like to hear good news. The government previously told the Science and Technology Committee it would establish a National Space Skills Institute. Is there any update on that? Is that going to happen? Do we know what's going on there?
Yes.
Okay.
Dr. Bate.
I think we're likely to take the intent of a specific institute into the work that we do for the Space for Skills, rather than have a separate institute per se. But to give an example of that, one of the things that employers are coming back to us and saying is that not just they have the gap, but they also have the gap in the training programs. So they can do a certain amount in-house, but particularly the SMEs want to see more training providers or specific space skills. So the Space Agency is now moving to a programme of funding of certified providers where there is a clear pull from the sector base itself.
Thank you. I mean, I think the whole skills gap is something that is completely UK-wide. I've got, you wouldn't think Hastings has some amazing space sector industries, vacuum engineering, precision engineering, and one of the things they talk about is the skills gaps coming through and the cost of recruiting people, because it's almost like a competition, is that it's very difficult to retain people because someone else poaches them by paying more. So it is something we've really got to think about. Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Michael Shanks.
Thanks. Back to me again. Just thinking here about the Space Industry Act from 2018, which was being reviewed, and it was due to conclude its review in April 2024. What do you think from that is for the regulatory environment? What do you think are the key things that need to be taken forward now? I mean, I was interested. I was reading the National Space Strategy, which has these 4 phases, and it says we're out of the ignition phase and into the thrust phase. Do you think that is where we're at, or in reality, or do you think that's just what the strategy says we're at?
I think in terms of the Space Industrial Plan that's just been published, that's exactly where my colleagues, ministers involved, say we are at. We are at the thrust phase from now up until 2030, and I think that's indicated by everything that's going on, especially in Scotland. Going back to the issue of the regulatory review, which is incredibly important, actually I think goes to the initial question that Mr. Shanks, you asked me, which is that there is a need, I think, for, given the sort of amorphous nature of space and the fact that it's hard to compartmentalise it, there is, I think, a very important need to ensure that that all the regulation surrounding space is effective, it's proportionate, and appropriate. And I think that is why that regulatory review is ongoing and will be published in due course. And it's also something that the Scottish Government have been invited to take part in as well.
Well, that was going to be my next question, really, was how much the Scottish Government have been involved in this, because we had some evidence that the regulatory environment is now got some bits that are in the Scottish Government's remit, particularly around the marine environment, and some parts, most of it, that's still within the UK environment. And actually, in one particular example, it was the marine aspect that was holding back part of the one of the projects. So how much on a day-to-day basis are the two governments talking about trying to streamline those approaches?
So it's certainly my understanding that the Scottish Government were invited to take part in the review, including stakeholder events in Edinburgh. How often that there is a discourse on a kind of more regular level, I'm not sure. I don't know if you can assist with that.
I think there are working level conversations at a very regular and frequent level. But I also think in answer to what happens after the 2018 Act and regulatory review, the intent is to publish before recess around the summer. It is within the world. I think sees the UK as having world-leading regulation because of the 2018 Act. So we're often asked at agency level by other agencies to support them in sort of similar endeavours on the legislative programmes that they're involved in and the consequences of that. But that doesn't mean that we're just sort of sitting there. So in the consultation we recently put out, we're now analysing the responses from. One example that we knew from industry was that having a variable limit on liabilities really matters. So if a company is able to show that they have manoeuvring capability of their satellites, have a clear deorbiting plan, are doing the right things, we want to be able to incentivise and want to have proactive regulation that means they would have to invest less on the insurance side. So we've put forward proposals on that. But the truth is that the kind of global regulation is only there in parts. There's 1967 Outer Space Act, and the UK is one of the 3 founding signatories alongside the US and the Soviet Union at the time. But as we go back to the moon, and as we now look, for example, at returning samples from the moon, and eventually from Mars, it strikes that it is very important to maintain that leading position. So that's why we hosted the Planetary Protection conference the week before last, and we will look to continue to do that because we can convene people so that not just our own industry is safe, so anybody launching a satellite from the UK does so safely, but it's a global commons at the end of the day. There's only so much metal that can be in a particular orbit, and if we mess up the moon globally, it is messed up for a long time, if not forever. So we're really trying to make that global impact as well as do the right thing just in the UK.
Just on the specific question I asked, though, around the regulatory regime here in the UK, because, of course, you're right, it's a global issue, but if we don't even have cohesion within the UK on our regulatory regime, that doesn't bode well for the global reach on this. So on the various different aspects of regulation that, for example, a launch has to go through, say a launch in Shetland, for example, they have regimes through the UK government, they also have regimes through the Scottish government. Rather than just being around inviting the Scottish government to be part of a discussion, what genuine action is there to make sure that a company that's ready to do that has as easy a process as possible to do it while maintaining all the standards we would expect from it?
So I think there is constant engagement with the relevant companies that are being are involved. As I said, in terms of the various regulatory aspects, the Civil Aviation Authority is obviously the principal one coming under the Department for Transport. So I think there is that infrastructure, regulatory infrastructure exists, and I think in terms of what I'm aware of, that there haven't been any issues with that, but always would welcome any input that the committee might give.
I think the issue isn't so much that individual bits don't work, it's that the landscape is already quite complex, and of course it's going to be complex in a field like this, but is it more complex for companies in Scotland than it is in England? And it may or may not be the case, but I suppose that's what we want to, as this develops further, make sure that those are aligned as much as possible. Thanks.
Yeah. Can I just finish this with a couple of very quick questions, if that's all right, just to help us with the report? One of the things that we've heard consistently by the sector, and particularly the SMEs and small businesses that are associated with it, is that where they're very grateful for any resource and financing that's coming their way, they'd much rather prefer to be a customer of the government, as this gives added security and allows them to set out plans and grow their businesses. What do you make of that, and what progress is being made to make sure that government's doing everything possible to support that by actually buying and purchasing the skills that the sector's got?
I think, if I can answer generally, and then perhaps Dr. Bate could, because I think that there is, in the defence space sector, that is well developed. I think government is a customer. In the civil space sector, less so. It's less developed. That's partly because government needs change, and it's hard again to predict what services government might use or purchase. But there are still some good examples. Data collection being one of them. Data sets being used by government, making data sets available to government. But,
just before you do, there was one example that really struck me when we were in the States, and it was a company that we visited in, I think it was San Francisco, who one of their customers was the Welsh Government for the whole range of services, particularly data mapping in rural areas. And if that could happen there, why can't we use that from Scottish-based companies? If I could, Scottish government, yeah, exactly, yeah.
Look at the Welsh Government.
Well, we'll allow Dr. Bate to answer that one.
So, from the UK Space Agency specific side, we're funded through research and development, capital funding. So there are some limits on what we can use the money for, which is why traditionally it's been R&D grants. But we do think that there is a need to move more towards contracts. So we've been trying to test to the limit what we are entitled safely to do. And that led to a contract not so long ago with a company called GHGSat, a methane monitoring company, because we could identify a need for that data set, not this is a requirement that a government department has asked for, which is often the challenge, but say, well, even if there isn't, we can see the value of this data set in establishing methane plumes in the UK and beyond. And we think that's good enough that if the data is available, then government departments will be able to use it. We'll also be able to make contributions to international organisations on methane monitoring. And on that basis, we went ahead, and that's been very successful, well received by the company, but well received by the sector as well. So we're pushing the boundaries on what we can do. It is definitely worthwhile.
And just lastly, this to you, Mr. Bate, could you maybe update the committee about the new UK Space Agency office in Edinburgh? What progress has been made to realise that?
Yes, absolutely. So we will. We're aiming to open in June. So very excited. We have a number of colleagues from the Space Agency who have already volunteered to be to make that their permanent office location, which is good in itself. But we want to go further than that, and by moving out of just having offices in London, Swindon, and Harwell, which was the situation inherited 2 or 3 years ago, and to now have locations in Edinburgh as well as in Cardiff and Leicester, we can tap into the talents in those local areas and build those offices up. I want to see the Edinburgh office to be a pretty thriving hub.
Well, on that piece of good news, I think we'll bring this session to a close. And other than to thank you for your attendance today, and thank you, Lord Cameron, I think your first appearance in the Select Committee, so I think it went rather well, I would say. But so it's good to see both of you. But if there's anything else that you feel you could usefully contribute to this inquiry, please get in touch. I think there's a couple of things that we might come back to you about in terms of the evidence that you gave. But for this afternoon, order.
The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended.